Welcome to Showcase Biographies. I hope you enjoy this edition on the life and lore of Elizabeth Bathory, one of the most prolific female murderers of all time. For more content like this, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and clicking the bell icon so we can notify you of every new biography we publish. Now, our episode on Elizabeth Bathory. Part 1. The Wolf's Teeth and the Golden Age. The crest of the House of Bathory is a chilling sight. 3 wolf's teeth, curved and sharp, encircled by a dragon biting its own tail. In the year 1560, this symbol represented one of the most powerful and eccentric bloodlines in the Kingdom of Hungary. It was into this world of immense wealth and staggering violence that Elizabeth Bathory was born. Elizabeth Bathory, often known as the Blood Countess, was not merely a member of the Hungarian nobility. She was the product of a dynasty whose influence spanned the breadth of Central Europe. Her lineage was a confluence of 2 immensely powerful branches of the Bathory family, the Exed and the Somlyo. This dual heritage placed her at the very epicenter of political power in the late 16th century. Her familial connections were nothing short of royal. Through the Exed line, her uncle, Stephen Bathory, ascended to the throne of Poland, reigning as king, while other relatives held the powerful title of Princes of Transylvania. In an era where the common person's life was often treated with contempt and considered little more than a cheap disposable commodity, Elizabeth was born into a sphere of unparalleled and seemingly divine privilege. This was a world of vast estates, impenetrable castles, and absolute authority over thousands of serfs. Yet even this gilded cage held its darkness. Her early childhood, spent primarily at the family seat of Exed Castle, was marred by significant physical suffering. As a young girl, she was frequently and violently afflicted by a debilitating condition, known at the time as the falling sickness. This term was the 16th century designation for severe convulsive seizures, a neurological disorder that modern medicine recognizes as epilepsy. The nature and intensity of these episodes would have been terrifying for a child of that era. The historical record subtly suggests that the treatments administered for these early health struggles were drawn from the brutal and often superstitious folk medicine of the 16th century. One particularly gruesome and perhaps formative remedy involved the ritualistic rubbing of the blood of a non-sufferer onto the lips of the afflicted to cleanse the sickness. This early, highly dramatic exposure to blood, utilized in a ritualistic and supposedly medicinal context, is a critical point in her biography. It is plausible that this environment, where the vital fluid was normalized as a powerful, curative, and deeply mystical tool, planted the insidious seeds for the monstrous legends of vampirism and mass murder that would ultimately consume her legacy. Part 2. The Black Knight and the Shadow of War. The life of Elizabeth Bathory was inextricably linked to power, lineage, and a brutal world of political and military conflict. At the exceptionally young age of 10, Elizabeth was formally betrothed to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a man 8 years her senior. Nadasdy, an accomplished soldier who would later earn the ominous moniker, the Black Knight of Hungary, for his strategic genius and utter ruthlessness in battle against the encroaching Ottoman Turks, represented a powerful political alliance. Their eventual marriage in 1575 was not merely a family affair, but a momentous diplomatic and social event of the Hungarian nobility, a spectacle attended by an estimated 4,500 guests, underscoring the formidable influence of the involved families. A critical detail of this union highlighted Elizabeth's superior aristocratic standing. Count Nadasdy, whose family was considered of a lower rank than the illustrious Bathory's, took her family name, a highly unusual and significant concession in the rigidly patriarchal society of the Renaissance era, securing the prominence of the Bathory line. With her husband constantly engaged on the frontier, defending the kingdom against the Turks, Elizabeth was left in a position of extraordinary authority. She was entrusted with the daunting responsibility of governing 17 villages and administering several massive strategically vital fortresses, most notably the craggy, isolated Sage Castle situated in the Carpathian Mountains. It was during these extended and profound periods of isolation, far from the central control of the court, and amidst the severe social disruption caused by continuous warfare and the horrors of the plague, that the disturbing seeds of her future depravity are said to have taken root. Historical accounts, though often sensationalized, suggest a chilling complicity, or perhaps even an initial encouragement, from her husband in her developing sadism. Some chroniclers claim that Ferenc Nadasti, a man hardened by war and accustomed to extreme violence, introduced his wife to the concept of torture as a tool of management, even reportedly gifting her a pair of spiked gloves to be used as punishment on household servants who failed in their duties. Together, the Count and Countess formed a formidable, terrifying, and unchallenged ruling power over their vast domain, administering their lands with a literal and symbolic iron fist, while the rest of their world teetered on the brink of collapse due to the relentless pressures of the Ottoman Wars and widespread pestilence. Part 3. The Making of a Monster. The death of Elizabeth Bathory's husband, Ferenc Nadasti, in 1604 marked a profound and catastrophic turning point in her life. This event did not merely leave her a widow, it transformed her into an immensely wealthy and politically exposed figure. With vast land holdings and significant influence, Elizabeth became an immediate and irresistible target for the political machinations and territorial ambitions of the powerful men who surrounded her. This vulnerability was compounded by her independence, creating an environment where suspicion and avarice could fester. It was in the decade following Nadasti's death that the whispers and rumors surrounding her depravity metastasized into a public scandal that could no longer be ignored. The dark deeds, which had previously been confined to the hidden corners of her estates, now drew official scrutiny. The enduring, sensationalized narrative of the Blood Countess claims a staggering number of victims, often exceeding 600 young women. While the sheer scale is contested by some historians, the core fact of widespread and systematic murder is substantiated. Her victims were primarily drawn from the peasant class, poor, vulnerable girls lured to her Chejte castle and other estates with the false promise of domestic employment and a better life. The brutality she inflicted was absolute, reflecting a profound psychological detachment from her victims' humanity. The most infamous and sensational component of the legend, the macabre myth that she habitually bathed in the blood of virgins as a perverse cosmetic ritual to maintain her youth, did not originate in the actual, contemporaneous legal records. This detail was a later, chilling addition to the popular folklore, likely emerging as a grotesque embellishment. It may have been a hyperbolic, yet poetically horrific interpretation of the physical reality of her crimes. She was, on numerous occasions, discovered literally covered in the blood of her victims, following hours of intense manual torture. This suggests the myth was built upon the terrifying truth of her constant proximity to violent death. Bathory's methods of torture and murder were characterized by diversity and systematic cruelty. During the brutal Hungarian winters, a common practice was the ritualistic exposure of her victims. Girls were reportedly stripped naked, doused in frigid water, and left to freeze to death in the open courtyards of the castle. Other methods demonstrated a deeply sadistic imagination. Victims were covered in honey and abandoned outdoors to be slowly tormented by insects, while others were subjected to sustained attacks with needles, whips, and red-hot irons used to inflict deep and permanent injury. The legal proceedings ultimately gathered testimony from over 300 witnesses, including former servants and accomplices. Their collective accounts painted a horrifying, consistent portrait of a woman who had descended into a state of profound and sadistic criminal psychosis. This monstrous behavior was not random, but was enabled and fueled by her almost absolute, unchecked power over those in the lower social classes, who were viewed as disposable objects for her cruel amusement. Part 4. The Trial on the Wall. The formal investigation into Elizabeth Bathory's activities was finally initiated in 1610, an order given by King Matthias II himself. The impetus for this action was multifaceted. Foremost was the undeniable and escalating number of missing persons and the gruesome discovery of mutilated corpses in the vicinity of Bathory's estates, particularly around Shate Castle. However, a deeper, less publicized motive existed. King Matthias owed a substantial financial debt to the powerful Bathory family. A conviction for a capital crime, such as the numerous murders of which Elizabeth was accused, would automatically result in the forfeiture of her property and wealth to the crown, thus conveniently canceling the king's massive obligation. The climactic moment arrived on December 29, 1610, when the Palatine of Hungary, György Thurzo, who was both Elizabeth's cousin and a high legal authority, led a contingent to raid Shate Castle. The event quickly became the stuff of dark legend. According to contemporary accounts and subsequent folklore, the raiding party broke into the castle and allegedly found Elizabeth in one of her chambers, actively engaged in the torture of a young girl. The scene was reportedly horrific, with several other bodies, some deceased and others barely alive and gruesomely mutilated, surrounding her. The consequences were swift but unequal. Elizabeth's principal accomplices and servants, 4 trusted individuals, including her wet nurse and an estate manager, were subjected to a rapid and exceptionally brutal public trial. The proceedings resulted in their convictions and executions, with some sources claiming they were tortured before being burned at the stake or otherwise put to death as a gruesome deterrent. Elizabeth Bathory, however, was treated differently. Her immense power, wealth, and, crucially, her noble status as a countess from one of the most influential families in Hungary shielded her from the executioner's axe. The idea of publicly executing a member of the nobility was deemed a political impossibility, as it could destabilize the entire aristocratic order. Instead, she was sentenced to a unique and horrifying form of perpetual imprisonment. She was to be perpetually walled in within her own castle. Her chambers at Shate were thoroughly bricked up, with the workers leaving only a minimal slit or aperture. This narrow opening served the dual purpose of allowing small portions of food and water to be passed through and providing a minimal amount of air, but it admitted almost no light. Thus condemned, Elizabeth Bathory lived in total, suffocating darkness and complete isolation for the next 4 years. Her solitary confinement ended only with her death in August 1614. Part 5. Victim or Villain. Today, a compelling counter-narrative has emerged among a cohort of modern historians who have meticulously re-examined the life and trial of Elizabeth Bathory. These scholars argue forcefully that the infamous Blood Countess was, in fact, the victim of one of history's most successful and enduring disinformation campaigns, orchestrated for political and financial gain. The evidence for this revisionist view centers on several key factors. First and foremost was her immense wealth derived from one of the most powerful and land-rich families in the Kingdom of Hungary. Her vast estates, castles, and assets were a coveted prize. Second, her steadfast Protestant faith in a time when the Habsburg-controlled empire was aggressively re-establishing Catholic dominance created powerful, deeply motivated enemies at court. Crucially, the king, Matthias II, was deeply indebted to Elizabeth's family. Some historians suggest that seizing her property through a charge of treasonous criminality was a simple, brutal way to wipe out a massive royal debt. The timing and the manner of the investigation, conducted without the accused ever being formally tried in court, lends credence to the idea of a predetermined outcome. In this powerful alternative version of the story, the Blood Countess was not a supernatural or pathological monster, but a formidable, educated woman of high status. She was a shrewd administrator of her domains and a survivor of a famously long-lived and influential dynasty. Her property, therefore, was not merely confiscated due to her crimes, but was systematically stolen by the ambitious men, including members of her own family and the king, whom she had simply outlasted or whose interests she opposed. The core question remains a fascinating historical puzzle. Was Elizabeth Bathory a serial killer driven by a dark, obsessive pathology and the brutal customs of her violent age? Or was she merely a powerless pawn trapped in a high-stakes political and economic game of betrayal? Perhaps in the complex cruelty of 17th-century Central Europe, she was both a powerful noblewoman, whose actions may have strayed into violence typical of her class, but whose eventual fate was sealed when she became too rich, too well-connected, and too useful as a scapegoat to satisfy the calculated greed of her more powerful peers. Her story thus transforms from a simple tale of horror into a sophisticated lesson on how power, religion, debt, and gender intersect to write the history and create the monsters of the past. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Showcase Biographies. For more interesting episodes like this, simply subscribe after liking this video and click the bell icon for email reminders of our new episodes. Stay tuned for our future episodes, and thank you.